Good afternoon and welcome. A little late this week, but forgive me, it was foggy this morning, and my excuse. Anyway, hello. So, as you like it last night, Shelley, thank you. I'm delighted that you enjoyed it. It's actually proving quite popular. Hello, James and Greg and Grace. There you are. A quiet post-Halloween evening here in Dublin. Yes, and we're having a ball. David, there you are, over the pond as usual. Yeah, we're having an absolute ball. There's Barry with As You Like It. And people seem to enjoy it. And it is such a joyous play that it's not remotely surprising that post-lockdown and our first play back, people are having a good time at it. And I tell you, the actors are having a great time at it too. So that's all to the good. And for those of you who are in or around the Pittsburgh region, As You Like It will be continuing for so 2 more weeks anyway. And tickets are available and you can book. And you'll be very safe because everything in the building basically gets disinfected. And that includes me. So you're very safe. Just remember that in order to buy a ticket, in order to come and see the show, you must be vaccinated fully and you must wear a mask. But apart from that, you're very, very welcome to come along and enjoy it at reasonable rates. So I think that's all the announcements I have for this week. More on the Expand the Canon series next week. And of course, always remember that we are thrilled for your donations. We do thank the Allegheny Foundation for their incredible support for the webinar series, which means that we can continue to make this completely free. But with or without sponsorship, the webinars will always be free. And therefore, we do ask, if you can send a donation, please do. And we will still accept those $25 donations if anybody wants to join in on that little exercise, because as I keep on saying, every single dollar counts. Even in no matter what your own currency is, just send us it in as $25 and we'll be thrilled. So there you are, the 25 for 25. We're continuing that appeal through November. It has helped us considerably, and so if we can let it go for 1 more month through the month of November and see what it brings in. But just send $25 and it will make all the difference. And as I keep saying, every dollar you send, all those donation dollars are what put the play on the stage. We use your money to produce. We don't use your money for administration. That is covered by other grants and foundations, but it's your dollars that help us to put the work on the stage and to keep the actors and all the technicians and all the creative teams fully employed, because we do have the best team in Pittsburgh. I will say that without any apology. We've got the best actors and the best creative teams in Pittsburgh, and we need your help to keep them working with us. So that's that. So this week, we're back onto the basic plots, the mysterious 7. And this week I want to talk about a fundamental theme, overcoming the darkness. Now, what does that mean? And what has that to do with the 7 basic plots? Well, there is a fundamental truth, and whether you like to admit it or not, it's true for you and for me and for everybody else. We are all afraid of the dark. All of us. Every single one of us. Maybe not now, but at some point in our lives, and probably even now, somewhere deep down in the secret parts of you that only a decent cup of black coffee can reach, there is a fundamental fear of darkness, rather than simply saying the dark. It's probably our earliest childhood fear. We've all woken up in the night as small children, afraid of the dark. We've all had the experience of needing, a night light beside us when we were tiny, so that the monsters wouldn't bite. The great fundamental fear of childhood, to be alone in the dark without your mother. Primal fear. We all have it. And from the earliest experiences of storytelling, from the very first experience we have of stories being told to us, that fear of the dark is the most easily and readily invoked. That fear that there is something there in the dark that wasn't there when the light was on. And it's the juxtaposition of those two words, light and dark, that we'll be looking at. And this fear is probably based as much on instinct as it is on experience. Yeah, we're always afraid of things that we experience that hurt or cause pain or cause danger. You know, the burnt child fears the fire. But darkness frightens us on a deeper level. It's more instinctive than it is experience. Darkness frightens us because the dark can conceal that which we dread. Now, there are things that we dread, there are things that we're afraid of, that we can sort of deal with when the light is on. But in the dark, that's when the real fear takes over, because the darkness conceals. And darkness, the dark, takes away one of our fundamental senses, our ability to see. Sight is the first experience we have of anything. I've talked about this before, that the 5 fundamental senses that we have: to hear, to see, to hear, to touch, to smell, to taste. Those are the only ways we get information into our brain, into our imagination. Take away one of them, especially sight, introduce darkness, and all the other senses start to become heightened. Darkness, absence of sight, will always become joined with a heightened sense of sound. So you hear things in the dark much more specifically and much more intensely than if the light was on. And that is also true of touch and smell and even taste. When we're afraid, you can taste fear. It's the dryness in the mouth. They become exaggerated, stronger. And therefore your imagination, which is being fed by these senses, starts to generate images of what might be in the dark that you can't see. Take away the sense of sight, and suddenly everything has a totally different perspective. And in that sense, the darkness will take on its own identity inside our somewhat fevered imaginations. Darkness will suddenly become a thing, an entity. So what is the darkness? Who is the darkness in terms of storytelling? Why do we fear it? And how can we possibly defeat it? Those are the 4 fundamental questions that this overcoming the darkness exemplify to an extent. They are also the fundamental questions of storytelling in a much more general sense. Amongst all the complexity of all the plot lines that we've talked about, these 4 questions seem to be the most compelling and most exciting, and the most specific to all story plots, all of them. We are in thrall to the very idea of the undefeatable threat that must be defeated at all costs. So you have this wonderful balance of that which cannot be defeated must be defeated. It is the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. And that is where the storytelling becomes exciting. That's where our imaginations kick in. So if you have the undefeatable threat, which must be defeated at all costs, then you have the examples of the Dark Lord of the Rings, or the evil emperor of a galaxy far, far away, or monsters in the dark or the deep. Our sense of dread fires up the imagination, and it gives us the ultimate plot line to satisfy our basic desires for adventure. We want to be excited by that which we fear. That's how it works. Otherwise, you would never buy a theater ticket, or go and see a movie or watch something on TV. Without that excitement, that sense of adventure of this will overcome me and overwhelm me, I must fight back. How can I possibly do it? How can this challenge be met? That's the fundamental of all the storylines. So I'm just gonna take a look this week at just basically graze the surface of darkness in stories and why these stories of darkness are essential to our own sense of safety and security. Now, I've mentioned before, and my motivation for this whole series of talks on the basic plots comes from the book, The 7 Basic Plots by Christopher Booker. It is an amazing book, and in it he devotes a chapter on this very fundamental question and how all the plots that we've discussed so far are connected by this one primal fear. And by the way, I really heartily recommend this book if you want to take a deeper look at the whole topic. For me, as a director and adapter of books and things, it is my Bible in terms of plot structure and how it works. I do recommend it to you. But as I say, it is my Bible, but I warn you, it is as long as the Bible. It is a huge book. So I do recommend it, but only if you really want to have a very deep examination of this whole topic. Now, he argues, and I agree, that all the basic plots, all the fundamental storylines are basically or are of or about or contain a journey from darkness into light. And that's why I keep coming back to this is fundamental, this is original, this is something that we have an instinct for. More than our experience of it, our instincts are aware of this. A journey out of the shadow and, as it were, into the sun. And every tale with this theme, in its structure, is essentially the same story. Now that sounds a sort of grandiose thing to say, that all these stories are actually the same story. But in its fundamental, I truly believe they are. Because these are stories that emanate out of our childhood fears. Whether it's a story of a quest or a journey or a search for hidden treasure or lost princesses or rings of power, if it's a story of heroism, they all contain an element of overcoming the darkness. And the darkness can take very, very many forms. It can be human. It can be demonic. It could be an unnatural phenomenon. For instance, if those of you who remember that movie, The Fog, there you have a perfect example of the darkness being an unnatural phenomenon. So where does it begin, this very natural fear of the darkness? Primitive man and woman, very early Homo sapiens, or Neanderthals, or any other branch of the tree that produced us, sitting in their caves or in their campsites, would always maintain fire. Fire was essential for survival and progress. Not just for warmth and cooking, because obviously, fire gives warmth, fire allows you to cook meat, fire is essential on those levels. But they also knew, both instinctively and from experience, that the darkness is to be feared. And even in this primitive time, they no doubt taught this fact to their children. The darkness contains, there are things out there. To quote Game of Thrones, the night is dark and full of terrors. And it is. There are terrors out there that you might conquer in the light, but not in the dark. So no doubt, as I say, they taught this fact to their children. And I am certain that from the dawn of storytelling, tales of the darkness and its dangers were being told to the young. Long before the kind of fairy tales that were that developed in Europe, long before the Brothers Grimm or any of that, long before, and all over the world where Homo sapien, where the human species began to evolve, stories will have been told. Stories weren't suddenly invented out of the blue. This is something that goes back, the notion of giving information, teaching and training through the process of storytelling. The man in the cave coming back, or the men, as they worked in groups, coming back and telling the story of the hunt would have fascinated the children with the idea of animals, dangerous animals, tigers and elephants and mammoths and all sorts of things, would have been advising and teaching and directing young brains, young minds, by telling of the dangers of the world and especially the dangers in the dark. And the best way to do this always is by storytelling. You don't drag a child out and put it in front of a saber-toothed tiger and say, that's dangerous. No, but you do tell the story of it and what that animal can do and how dangerous it might be, and that when they are in the dark, they should lay low and keep safe because there are monsters in the dark. So this idea, the very idea of storytelling, was educational. All stories teach us, and they teach us to be safe in their own way. Almost all religions, I think all religions, or certainly all the major religions, have a creation story. It's part and parcel of being a religion that you explain why all this is here. Every religion, be it Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Shinto, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, whatever. Well, Jewish and Islamic is the same, and Christian are the same. The monotheistic God, the whole notion of Genesis is unique within those three particular faiths. But you take a look at the first chapter of Genesis, and in it you get a very early example of darkness into light. I will quote, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness." Now, this is not a religious lesson, whether you believe or not, and if you're a creationist, it's your business. All I'm saying is that even within that fundamental Judeo-Islamic Christian doctrine of the creation, and whether you, as I do, believe it was a wonderfully made-up story to try to explain the unexplainable, this notion that there was darkness and that light conquered it. God said, let there be light, and there was light, and he saw that the light was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, separated the two. Now, if you're of a scientific bent, you'll know that that's not quite what happened, but that the universe is basically dark and yet full of light. It's a wonderful thing, the way the human brain transforms these images into stories to try to explain it. And all stories contain this basic premise, that the darkness is to be feared and that it can be defeated with light. And just as darkness can take on a personification, we tend in storytelling to be anthropomorphic about darkness. It becomes a thing. So it is true with light, so that you have the demons of the dark and the warriors of the light. And even the youngest child can recognize this. Every child, no matter how young, can understand the idea of monsters and dragons and evil giants and all that goes into the darkness because of an instinctive and perhaps a genetic awareness that our instinct is to fear the dark. Our instinct is to go to the light. So, all of this begs a question. Is there a universal plot line? Are all stories basically the same? That may be going a little too far. I don't think so, but it might be. But is there a universal plot line, a fundamental, it's like a DNA of storytelling, that fundamental thing from which all other stories can evolve? Do all stories actually tell of overcoming the darkness? Which leads back to my earlier questions. What is the darkness? Who is the darkness? Why do we fear it? And how can we possibly defeat it? So let's look at those questions. What is the darkness? Well, basically, I believe that the darkness, aside from the scientific absence of light, the darkness is that thing or those things or elements that we most fear because they are dark, because we cannot truly see them. And so our true experience of them is by the other heightened senses. You can smell, you can hear, you can touch, touch something gloppy in the dark and you have no idea what it might be. It could be something pleasant and it could be usually something most unpleasant. Who is the darkness? And as I say, we have a tendency to anthropomorphize, to actually turn darkness into entities, to make it a thing, an identity or a form that within the story concept, within the imagination, it has taken an actual form. And that can be a living form, or it could be as I say, the fog is a perfect example of it. The swamp, the mere, the darkness. I mean, one of the best examples of that notion is the never-ending story. And I don't know if you've read it or seen the movie, but it is a perfect example of anthropomorphizing the darkness, this thing that is taking away everything, that it overwhelms everything and everything disappears into it. The black hole, that we do know about scientifically, is a perfect example. An entity in space, in science, an entity in physics that can swallow entire planets and suns. That is that thing way deep down in our imagination that we fear and that we dread. Why? Why do we fear the darkness? Because we have this primal dread of it. And in itself, the darkness appears initially to be overwhelming, that there is no way of escaping it, that it will overwhelm everything, that you are lost in it. And how can you possibly overcome it? And the answer to that is that there is always an unknown answer that we must discover on our journey into the dark. That when faced with the darkness, when faced with the problems that the darkness presents to us, somewhere in our experience, somewhere in our imagination, there is the knowledge, the ability to overcome it. But part of the journey is to find that within ourselves. And there are very, very good examples of this. If you take a look at the very early examples of it, let's look at children's stories. If you look, for instance, at the story of Little Red Riding Hood or of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, these stories begin with the notion, very simple notion, that the heroine comes from a safe place, her home with her mother. Mothers are very important in this. Mothers are very important in everything, but in this concept. So there you have a heroine, a young girl in all her innocence, in a safe place, in her home, everything is wonderful. And that heroine by adventure or misadventure, will travel to a place of danger and through a dark wood. In that dark wood, the heroine will encounter potential monsters of the dark. They being, in one case, a wolf in grandma's clothing, or in the other case, 3 bears who do not particularly like small girls sitting on their chairs, eating their porridge, and sleeping in their beds. Very simple stories, but there is a deep teaching mode to this. In the case of Little Red Riding Hood, a hero comes to save her. And through the intervention of a hero who comes and kills the wolf, rescues the grandmother who's still alive inside the wolf, and saves Little Red Riding Hood from the same fate, so that she can go home, escape back to her mother, to the point of safety. So a warrior of the light comes to defeat a lord of the dark, the wolf and the woodsman. In the other, the heroine escapes all by herself. She manages to escape, runs home again from the danger of the 3 bears, runs home again to the safety of home and mother. So there you've got that whole from light to darkness, inescapable, and then a solution occurs and the heroine returns to the light, or the light brings her back. Very fundamental, very simplistic. That's the fundamental story for everything. These stories are based on the principle, the basic ideas of leaving a safe place, experiencing a danger in the darkness, returning to a place of safety at the end, and of course, providing us with the one thing that in life, in every aspect of lives, we ultimately desire, the happy ending. Now, the happy ending is an important aspect because the happy ending shows to us that we have achieved the impossible. We have faced the insurmountable problem of the dark and found a solution and conquered it. So the happy ending is telling us that everything is fine, that we did it. Now, a more complex version of this, because these fairy stories are a wonderful indicator of how plots work, because they are the fundamental plots. Let's take Hansel and Gretel. Again, lost in the wood. The brother and sister, lost in the wood, went walking in the wood the way they shouldn't, captured by a wicked witch, a symbol of darkness, but tempted into the darkness by the fact that she lives in a gingerbread house. Now, who doesn't like gingerbread? I love it. But this house is made of temptation. This house in itself, the witch's house, is temptation. It'll be important. I'll come back to it. So they go willingly into the dark, tempted by what it has to offer. But then, threatened with the possibility of being cooked, baked in an oven, and eaten by the wicked witch, they realize the error of their ways, and that which looked tempting is in fact a trap, a trick, pulled by the darkness to envelop them, to take them from the light forever. So they become their own heroes. And they do that in the classic fairy tale manner of committing murder. They push the wicked witch into her own oven. She is burnt to a crisp. They return home safely, and they all live happily ever after. In other words, not just being lost in the dark, but being tempted by the darkness and realizing how foolish that temptation was and becoming their own heroes, making a discovery within themselves that what they did was wrong and that they've got to get themselves out of it, and getting themselves out of it and destroying the monster of the dark and coming home to the light, to a happy ever after conclusion. All of these children's stories, and we can list them eternally, all of these children's stories carry out that same basic function of from the light to the dark and back to the light again. The darkness is tempting. The darkness is overwhelming. The darkness is threatening. And you cannot get back to the light unless you can overcome the darkness. But what the stories teach us is there is always a way. Nothing lasts forever. There is always a way to overcome the darkness. Basic and fundamental pattern. A hero or heroine who is innocent and inexperienced, who falls under the shadow of the darkness. And as these stories become more complex, other elements can be introduced. There is always some life-threatening aspect to the tale, just with Hansel and Gretel, just with Little Red Riding Hood, just with Goldilocks and the Three Bears. There is some life-threatening aspect. For Goldilocks, it's being torn to shreds by the big grizzly bears. For Red Riding Hood, it is being eaten by the wolf. And for Hansel and Gretel, it is being cooked in the oven by the witch. And the world of whatever the story is will always be divided into these two realms, because that's an important picture to get in your mind. Where the darkness, one world where the darkness holds sway and, more importantly, power. The darkness is all-powerful. The darkness is seeing everywhere, like the seeing eye of Sauron. The darkness sees everything, the darkness is everywhere, and the darkness is invincible. Whereas the world of goodness and light always remains in the realms of shadow. They are always the underdog. And the hero coming from the realm of light has to overcome the impossibility of the dark. But at the conclusion of the story, which will always include a period, in that sort of, you might say, the final third of the story will always include a period of extreme danger or threat to the hero or heroine. It's no longer just the possibility of it. It's no longer skirting around it. It's no longer standing back and look at it and saying, oh my God, that really does look difficult. I'm not sure I can do that. Then you get into this final third section, if you like, of every storyline, where you get absolute and extreme danger or threat of it to the hero or the heroine. And then the hero or heroine will find a point of resolution where a reversal could take place to free the hero and heroine, to destroy the darkness, so that the treasure can be won, or the freedom will be gained, or justice will be done, and all will be right with the world, and they'll all live happily ever after. That's always fundamental to it. No matter what the story is, it's always there. The treasure will be won. The freedom will be gained. Justice will be done. Light will return, and the world will be a safe place again. Because these stories are teaching us what we need to do to no longer be afraid of the dark. And I go right back to the beginning of what I talked about, that fundamental, almost genetic fear of darkness. The stories are there and have been from the dawn of time to tell us, yes, it's dangerous. We're not going to pretend that there are not, the night is dark and full of terrors. It's true, but there is a solution. There is a way through. Now let's compare a couple of plots and see what I mean by this and how they all have similarities, almost identical in a way. Compare, for instance, two of the most popular fantasies that have graced the cinematic screens for the last 40 years. Look at the plot lines of Lord of the Rings and the original Star Wars trilogy, now called episodes 4, 5, and 6 for some reason. Compare those, the original Star Trek, or Star Wars, the elements. There is darkness dominating both. And darkness in both set cases, in both storylines, is personified as a being, as an entity. In Lord of the Rings, you have the Dark Lord Sauron. In Star Wars, you have the Evil Emperor. Now, interestingly, in those two series of films, you do not initially see a visualization of either of those characters. You don't see the Dark Lord Sauron. You know he's there. You never see in the initial part of the Star Wars trilogy, you never see the Evil Emperor, but you know he's there. And we know he's there because both stories do something else. They tell us that the Dark Lord or the darkness manifestation will always have somebody closer to us to lead us to them, or to do their bidding to wreak havoc, chaos, death, and destruction. Sauron has a sidekick called Saruman. The Evil Emperor has a sidekick called Darth Vader. Saruman and Darth Vader are the same character, just as Sauron and the Evil Emperor are the same character. They are the same personification of the darkness. And also, you will have the various heroes and their followers. For instance, and you may disagree with this one, but I think I'm fairly right in saying that the fundamental hero of that first series of Star Wars was Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he picked up a sidekick, Luke Skywalker, who picked up another sidekick, Han Solo. In Lord of the Rings, you have a hero who is ready to fight the darkness. He looks like the darkness himself, and yet he is in fact a hero, and his name is Aragorn. He is the Obi-Wan Kenobi. He is the super warrior, just as Obi-Wan Kenobi is. And Aragorn picks up sidekicks. They're called Frodo and Merry and Pippin. And they will be there to help and support. But you also get side plots, creating new heroes and new sidekicks. Because at the end of the first cycle of Lord of the Rings, Frodo becomes a hero. Frodo, who has merely been carrying something to Rivendell, now decides he will take on the task, the quest, and he will carry the ring. So he becomes a hero, not just a sidekick. But now a new sidekick is clearly developed in Sam Gamgee, who becomes his support, and incredibly important as well, as the darkness begins to descend on Frodo. And just as the darkness is descending on Aragorn, he has Legolas and Gimli to support him. Frodo has Sam to support him. It's essential that these characters are there in this hierarchy. But it's not just true in Lord of the Rings, because in the original Star Wars, Luke Skywalker develops a sidekick. And it's not Han Solo. It's C-3PO, the little droid, who's always there for him, who is always there to assist him, who is phenomenally, completely, and utterly loyal to him, as Sam Gamgee is to Frodo. C-3PO is the Sam Gamgee of Star Wars. Same character, same function, same purpose. Then you have the potential for defeat. It gets darker. Things go wrong. As you enter the darkness, it begins to take over. For instance, in Lord of the Rings, the loss of Gandalf to the Balrog. I remember many somebody missed who is Sauron's emanation or representation. The point I made is that Sauron's sidekick is Saruman. He is the one who carries out the work for Sauron, just as Darth Vader carries out the work for the Evil Emperor. Anyway, to come back to the point, the potential for defeat. I remember the first time I read Lord of the Rings, which was about 100 years ago. I remember the very first time I read it, to the point where Sauron, where the Balrog, you shall not pass, and Gandalf disappears and dies. The sense of, oh my God, how can they possibly survive without him? The despair that moment engenders. Not just because I have a vivid imagination, but because I have an imagination, as we all do. And we can see that when the one guiding light is snuffed out, darkness will descend. They have no hope. Or in the same storyline at Helm's Deep, when all possibility of survival is gone, when the orcs and the creatures of Sauron are destroying everybody, and even elves are dying, and it's all total, complete despair. What appears at the top of the hill, dressed in white, but Gandalf? The light comes and destroys that army. The impossible suddenly can be resolved. There is a way to solve every dilemma that the dark can offer. Or for Frodo, in that, the surrendering to the power of the One Ring. And what is he surrendering to? Temptation. Exactly the thing that Hansel and Gretel surrendered to when they went into the gingerbread house. The darkness presented something that was so tempting they could not resist it. And remember what is written inside the ring? One ring to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them. That once you succumb to the temptation of the ring, it will dominate you. You will be lost because of that temptation. But look at Star Wars, the perpetual round of Death Star to Death Star, an impossibility for the Rebel Republic. This empire is so strong, so dominant. They can build a mini planet that can destroy other planets with one zap. The impossibility of defeating the dark side, that power of the Jedi, the Force, that the dark side of the Force is stronger. And it's stronger because it's more organized. It's stronger because it's more determined. It's stronger and it's more powerful because people fall into the temptation of what the dark side can offer. Just as in later episodes, Anakin Skywalker falls into the temptation that the power the dark side offers. You could bring your dead wife back from the dead if you went to the dark side. You can have as many cookies and candies as you like if you come into the gingerbread house. It's the same plot. The temptation of joining the dark side is seductive. The temptation of succumbing to the ring of power is almost irresistible. All the challenges that occur in both of these storylines are based on the same premise. The darkness will dominate through its representative, the Emperor Palpatine, the Dark Lord of the Rings, Sauron, and that only the courageous and the selfless hero can defeat them, overcoming almost impossible odds, and by complete trust in themselves and the service of the light. Aragorn's determination to destroy Sauron, with Frodo as his mechanism. Luke Skywalker, even that end of that first episode, Luke Skywalker doing the impossible, flying his flight fighter and turning off the computer and trusting, use the Force, Luke, use the Force, discovering within himself a power and an ability that he never knew he had, coming to that realization that he is a force of light, that he can overcome the darkness, and pushes the trigger and the thing goes down quite impossibly, defied all laws of physics, down into the Death Star and blew it up. Aragorn, using Frodo as his mechanism, stands up against, prepares to die, is willing to die to give the opportunity for the ring bearer to destroy the ring. Same story. That only the courageous and the selfless hero can defeat the darkness by overcoming almost impossible odds and by a complete trust in themselves. And sometimes within that storyline, you'll find that it is the unlikely hero that saves the day. For instance, two similarities. In the end of that first episode, it's Han Solo at the end of the first Star Wars movie that turns up just at the right moment to take out the people that are trying to stop Luke Skywalker so Luke can do the job. Right at the end of The Lord of the Rings, when they're on Mount Doom, it is Sam Gamgee who carries Frodo that last mile into Mount Doom. Without Sam, it would not have been solved. So that the warriors of the light, as it were, are not always necessarily the primary hero. Sometimes they are the secondary hero, because all of us can find strength within us. And that's what the stories are teaching us. No matter what you are, no matter how lowly you may be in the storyline, we can all find a strength within us to defeat that thing we fear. And you can find that same plot in so many stories. For instance, The Seven Samurai, or if you prefer, The Magnificent Seven, is exactly that, where a town is overwhelmed by evil forces to the point when there is no solution whatsoever. It cannot be solved. But eventually, a group of samurai or gunslingers come together and find a solution to the problem. And that story has been repeated. Clint Eastwood did it wonderfully in High Plains Drifter. Same story, exactly the same story. Making people realize that within themselves, there is a transition that can take place that can turn them from victim to hero, that can turn off the dark and on the light. In fact, every war movie ever made probably has, I would say certainly has, exactly that theme within it. That by using those extraordinary resources within ourselves, by making those discoveries within ourselves, we can conquer the dark. And I can't think of a war movie that doesn't have that element within it. And just about every science fiction story ever made, overcoming the dark. From things like 2001, A Space Odyssey, all the way through to the name of it's gone out of my head, the spaceship that comes back from the edge of the universe. Every one of these stories contains that element, that we can overcome it if we make that special effort. And sometimes that special effort or that special sacrifice includes our own lives. But we will defeat the dark. Even most love stories have a strong element of the darkness, stepping in between the lovers. That you set up a love story, which is all lovely and happiness, the darkness arrives in some form or another. And it takes an act of courage on the part of one or both of the lovers to overcome the darkness and prevent the ending of the affair, to prevent the ending of the relationship. But there is another and very important element to these stories. And I've alluded to it. And that is, and you'll find it in every plotline, that the hero or heroine must make a major discovery, and it's a discovery about themselves. They must come to a point of self-realization. They've got to discover within themselves a strength that they didn't know they had, or a capacity that they didn't know they had, an understanding of something that they didn't know they had. And in fact, strangely enough, our production of As You Like It, we were discussing this because the play begins with a girl called Rosalind who falls in love at first sight with somebody. But before the play is over, she has discovered the necessity of teaching the one she loves what loving is and how to love her, to teach her man how to love her. Because romanticism can be the darkness. And unless you actually get through that point to a sense of reality about loving, the darkness will take over. Romanticism dies, but true love is something else entirely. So this moment of self-realization in the characters changes the possibilities of the plot line, changes the possibility that the darkness can overcome all. Because the reason you were afraid of the darkness was because you didn't understand your own abilities to deal with it. And in the storyline, in all these storylines, you are being taught something inside you can solve this. Hansel and Gretel realized the foolishness of their temptation, realized what the solution would be, carried it out, and they all lived happily ever after. So what that tells us is that the identity of the darkness, whatever it may be, is not invincible. It is, in fact, vulnerable, and it can be defeated. But we have to realize that. And I use the word realize in its very pure sense of bring it to a reality. Discover that thing in ourselves, that real aspect of ourselves that can carry this out. It's not just part of the importance of these stories, it is the importance of these stories. These stories were first invented to teach us. And when I say first invented, I'm not going back to Hans Christian Andersen and the Brothers Grimm. I'm going back to the man in the cave and his wife and his children and the dark out there. And the night is dark and full of terrors. There's where the stories began. That's how far back this goes. From the point at which we had the intelligence and the articulation to express our fears and to address our fears. These stories were invented to teach us that we ourselves have the strength within us to defeat the dark, whatever that dark may be. And that our most dangerous enemy, the most dangerous enemy we have, is not the darkness. The most dangerous enemy we have is our fear of the dark. And when we make that discovery, we become the conquering hero. We are a conquering hero, we just don't know it. Just like Goldilocks and Hansel and Gretel, just like Frodo and Luke Skywalker, just like Hamlet, who was faced with the darkness presented to him by his dead father, seeing it evidenced in his uncle Claudius as a murderer, Hamlet followed and discovered a strength within himself and an understanding. He had a fear of death all his life, to be or not to be. That's the question. I don't know. I kill myself, but I wouldn't know what's going to happen next. Comes to the point, it will come when it comes. If it be now, it'll come later. If it not come later, it will be now. The brightness, the readiness is all. The understanding that no matter what happens, I must do what I must do. And if the consequence of that is my death, so be it. But Hamlet is following the same basic story plot. We can defeat the dark, and we can let the light in. And we look upon the light, and it is good. And we find our mother again. So, that's everything for this week. Thank you for that. If you have any questions, if you have any doubts, if you want to disagree with me, please do. I'm always up for an argument. So, as I say, if you're in the Pittsburgh area, tickets for As You Like It are on sale. You cannot go to a safer place. We're probably safer and more hygienic than your own kitchen. And we all know how hygienic our kitchens are. So please give us a call. The run is until November 20th, and it's a lovely show with the most comfortable theatre seats in Pittsburgh. If you like us, even if you don't like us that much, do consider our 25 for 25 donation. $25. Just write a check now, stick it in the post. Go onto the website, punch it in. We'll take your donation that way. But always remember, every dollar you send us helps to put the plays on the stage. Okay, that's that for this week. We'll see you in a week's time, I hope. And in a minute, we've got a question. Why do we sometimes create a happy ending? Because we need to. Because we need the confirmation that all goodness is possible. And sometimes a sad ending is, in fact, a happy ending. Sometimes, if you look at King Lear dies at the end. Just when he thought everything was great and he was going to be with his daughter, they hang her and he dies. But in a sense, he has completed his journey. And I talked about Lear before, and I will be talking about it again. It is the ultimate journey play, that the wheel has come full circle. He has completed his journey. It is, in a sense, a happy ending because he is no longer the victim of his own darkness. He has discovered his own light. I hope that answers you. So we don't sometimes create a happy ending. We need a happy ending. We need to believe that because that is our bulwark against despair. What's that one? What would be the temptation obstacle in Star Wars? The dark side, obviously. The temptation to go to the dark side. It is the temptation Anakin Skywalker falls for and eventually destroys him until he becomes more machine than man as Darth Vader. It is the temptation that is presented to Luke constantly. And in the confrontation with the Emperor, the temptation to strike the Emperor down would make him completely shift to the dark side. Anger is what the darkness wants. Peace and tranquility is what the darkness hates. So there you are, Star Wars, the ultimate temptation. The gingerbread house or the ring of power in Star Wars is the dark side. And every storyline has one. Right, I have to stop now. But thank you so much for being with me. Send me an email if you have any questions, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.